It must have been towards the end of my fieldwork in Jakarta. For over a year, I had lived in one of the world's poorest neighborhoods. I was researching the impact of climate changes, and here in this slum, where people lived in wooden shacks, the climate crisis was not a future nightmare. Instead, it was a daily reality, with floods from the river that constantly destroyed people's furniture, washed away their few possessions, with polluted water that made them sick. During this year, I had coexisted with these people. They were my neighbors, my interlocutors, the anthropological word for research participants or the people you observe and interview. Some of them had become my friends. I had been living in the house of Ika, a widow, a mother of a son, a grandmother, and a sex worker. She had taken up the role of my mother rather than my friend, to be honest. She was always criticizing the clumsy ways in which I cooked rice or got dressed or prayed. And whenever she had a customer, she hushed me out, even if that was in the midst of the night. Luckily, in this neighborhood, nobody ever seemed to sleep at night. Most of the people here worked on the nearby night market. They sold food, mostly deep-fried snacks, and so even when I roamed around my house at 2 a.m., waiting for Ika to have finally made some money for the day, I'd bump into singing, chatting, joking, and smiling friends. And one of them was always Tikus, a boy, still a teenager when I met him. He was the one who first brought me into the neighborhood after I had met him in a bus. He'd entered it to sing for passengers in return for money. In Indonesia, they call boys like him singing beggars. But he didn't beg for money. He lured us into sharing what we had and what he needed. He was a good musician, even though he could not read notes. He was also a smart analytical mind, even though he had never received schooling and could not read nor write much. In anthropology, we call informants like Tikus key participants. They are the ones who help us understand what we see around us. They are the gatekeepers to the field, to the area and the people that we study. Key participants stand out from all the other people we meet and talk to because they seem to be born naturally as researchers. They are able to look at their own lives with a mental distance that allows them to see sharply what is really going on. And through ongoing conversations with us, they help us to see that too. Now, in our academic papers, we call people like Tikus the gatekeepers to our field. But they are, of course, much more than that. They represent the field itself. They become our dear friends, or at least the people we trust most and count on during our periods in strange environments. And in many cases, and certainly in my case, they become our personal teachers. Tikus was the one who would bang at my door when he knew a new flood was coming. He took me at the back of his motorcycle when I had gotten so sick from living in unhygienic circumstances unknown to my Western body that I needed to see a doctor quick. He found me the house with Ika and made sure I paid only the local rent. I was embarrassed about that fact, really, but he insisted. We were friends, and so he would make sure I was being treated as a friend. Almost every day, Tikus and I spent many hours talking. We had formed a habit of finding each other during heavy rains, which occurred daily during the wet season and lasted long. We'd seek shelter somewhere or simply sat under an umbrella, and I'd ask him questions about what I saw and thought, and he would answer. Always in simple wording, with deep layers of understanding. And despite this very special friendship, And despite the fact that I was extremely grateful for the experience of living in this neighborhood, a world so different from my own, it would be a lie to say I liked my life there. It was noisy, without any privacy. The door in my house would not lock. The place where Ike and I slept was always occupied by 10 or so street children. I never had any time for myself, which is challenging for the introvert that I am. The neighborhood was dangerous too, not just because of the floods, but also because of police riots, fires that burned down the wooden houses. More than once I helped bringing water buckets to a house that was smoldering. The streets in this slum were too narrow for fire trucks, and besides, no one from the authorities really cared about these people losing all they had. They were regarded the lowest of the lowest, not even real citizens, but just criminals. This is a perspective on the poor that is unfortunately widespread in this world. And yet, these same people cared for me so lovingly. When I got too skinny because of the many stomach infections that had creeped into my body, they cooked for me, fed me, massaged my belly, spooned me plant medicines. It didn't help much. My body needed rest and hygiene and antibiotics. I knew that, and I hated it. And I knew I would soon have to leave, back to my own comfortable apartment in Amsterdam, where I overlooked canals that were deemed pretty, not dangerous by people, and with fire alarms installed in every house. I looked forward to leaving the area, where everything was so loud and filthy and without hope. And at the same time, I was devastated that I would leave these friendly people behind. It felt as if I was letting them down. It didn't make sense that I would return to a place so comfortable and so safe, and that they had to continue to live here. How could I ever enjoy the wealth, the joys of going for fancy dinners and tasting expensive wines, the normality of being able to count on insurance and a clean hospital when needed? How could I live my old life and not feel guilty towards these people who were for some perverse reason born in this and not my place of the world? One night, after Ika had sent me out again, I told Tikus about my guilt. We were sitting on the rooftop of a house, overlooking the river. It was dark around us, aside from the yellow light that peeked in between the wood on which we sat. Tikus looked at me long, and then shook his head, first slowly and then quicker. Eventually he smiled, but he also frowned his eyebrows, and then he taught me the lesson that I would not forget for the rest of my life. "But now you listen to yourself, Roanne," he said. "You were given this beautiful life in a safe and rich part of the world, and you now say you refuse to enjoy that because you have happened to see that other people were not granted such a life? This life is an amazing gift for you, even though you and I can never understand who gave it to you and why. But now you're going to tell me you will not make use of the gift. That is not helpful to me, a person who did not receive the gift of safety and wealth. Instead, it means not only that I cannot enjoy the type of life that you have, but also that you will not fully experience the wonderful life that was granted to you. By feeling guilty and sad in your part of the world about the other part of the world, you make it so that none of us is happy with that life of yours, which means that you let it go wasted?" I stared back at him and blinked my eyes again and again. I heard myself promise him that I would try to enjoy my beautiful, rich, and safe life to the fullest, as not to let it waste. And I do. Ever since Tikus taught me that lesson, I correct myself when I feel guilty about what I have and so many people have not. I correct myself when I feel wrong for not living in violence or disease or constant stress. I was granted this life without ever knowing why. Others were not. So whenever I see a war on television, and I see plenty of those, or whenever I see people fleeing for floods on a photo in the newspaper, I stick to my promise to Tychus. Instead of feeling guilty, an emotion that makes me want to curl up in my bed and freeze my thinking, but is not helpful to anyone, I try to use my mental energy and privilege to help where I can and give away what I don't need. And then I return to the gift that is called my life, in full appreciation and admiration for this world and the many wise people in it. You'll meet more of them in the next episode. Thank you for listening and traveling and learning with me.